Hey guys, it's DVD and Blu-ray update time, and tonight we're going to start with one that I actually forgot about last time. This is Midnight from Arrow. Midnight is directed by John A. Russo, who it claims on the cover of this was the author of Night of the Living Dead. This one is an early 80s satanic slasher movie, which features John Amplas, who you may remember from Martin, but more importantly, Lawrence Tierney. Now, he was a bad boy in the 40s and 50s, used to play in a lot of gangster movies, and I remembered him from The Devil Thumbs a Ride, which was shown on the original Moviedrome. And then all of a sudden, Quentin Tarantino's got him cast in Reservoir Dogs. By all accounts, he's quite a difficult guy to get on with, so he's never really made a career since then, but he was getting on a bit back in the 90s. But anyway, Midnight features him in a brief role. This is a pretty low-budget slasher film from the very early 80s, and it did spawn a sequel with the imaginative title Midnight 2, and that one came along I think in the 90s, and that featured one of the characters from this. So yeah, did enjoy that one, Midnight. And sticking with Arrow, this is Combat Shock. So this got a release by Troma, but it's not an actual Troma produced film, it was an independent film called American Nightmares. And at some point Troma got hold of it, switched it around a bit, gave it a new title and released it under their banner. If you've ever seen a Troma movie, this is nothing like it. Troma films are generally quite comedic. This one is just downright depressing. It's pretty much the story of a Vietnam vet who's gone back to New York and he's on Poverty Row. And he's got a deformed baby and a nagging wife. And it's the story of one day in his life trying to make ends meet. The film itself is very slow moving, but it does have a lot of really depressing atmosphere to it. And it also has this deformed baby that's a puppet, and it's really spooky. And all this builds up to the grand bloody finale. I've got to say, this film drags on a hell of a lot. I watched the original American Nightmares version that's on this disc. You get both versions. You get the Troma Combat Shock and the original movie. There's also some good extras on here as well. But anyway, I found it very slow, pretty depressing. It had a couple of moments where I thought it was quite original, but generally it was pretty grim stuff. So if you want my opinion, I'd say give this one a pass. Yeah, Combat Shock. And yet more Arrow. This one is Pieces. This is a 1982 Spanish slasher movie featuring Christopher George, who you may remember as the cop in The Exterminator. The cover art on this makes this look great, but let's be honest, this film is real low budget, cheap Spanish exploitation. There is some kind of a plot going on there, but it's generally just about bringing on the next murder. Now this is the Arrow version, and I have only seen the really cheap, I think it was a Boulevard DVD version. And I'll be honest, the film bored me to tears. But since it's Arrow, I figured I'd give it another chance. Apparently this is a cult favourite, but not in my house. Pieces. Moving over to Aerodrome briefly. This is Don't Go in the House. This is one of the original video nasties. These Aerodrome releases baffle me. This film is good enough to have had a proper Arrow release, not just the budget label release. And it kind of annoys me that it does. Now these have reversible covers so you can get rid of that generic looking front. But the alternate cover for this one is a foreign language poster and it really doesn't look that good. Normally I'd turn these over, but this one I've just left it as is. The film itself though, thoroughly enjoyed this one. It's kind of a slow burn horror about this lunatic. He's clearly based on Norman Bates. And his mum used to burn him, and now he's grown up, she's a skeleton, and he goes around taking it out on anybody he can lure into his house, into his steel room, and then he dons his welding gear and gets a flamethrower and burns them. Sounds pretty nasty. It's actually quite an amusing film, but it is very dated. Everything's all about disco in this movie. There's even a scene where he goes to get a new disco outfit. But as cheap early 80s slashers go, I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and it deserves a proper release from Arrow. Don't Go in the House. And the final Arrow DVD, something quite different. This is Jaguar Lives, or Jaguar Lives. This one stars Joe Louis. Now Joe Louis was a karate champion before the likes of Chuck Norris, but he didn't really take off in movie roles too well. This is one of the few starring roles that he got. This is clearly a very cheap action movie. It reminds me a lot of the Cannon movies, but it's pre-Cannon. But the cast list on this is incredible. The whole budget seems to be spent around getting as many Bond people in as you can possibly get. and they're all barely in it. Not only on the cover there we've got Christopher Lee, we've got Donald Pleasance, we've also got Joseph Wiseman, who is Dr. No. Also featuring in this is Anthony DeLongis, who I've never seen in anything other than playing Blade in the Masters of the Universe movie. This was a thoroughly enjoyable, top-notch, cheap, cheesy, ridiculous action movie, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And because it's Arrow, it gets some nice treatment. Inside there's a poster and there's postcards. And we do get a few extras on here. There's an interview with Joe Lewis, which I was amazed to see was conducted by Andrew Stanton. And if you're a fan of Hong Kong Legends, he was the guy that did the commentary on The Protector. But yeah, Jaguar Lives, absolute classic. Well worth checking out from Arrow Video. So moving on to Asian cinema, this one actually stars Joe Lewis again. This is Mr. X, a rapid-fire fight fest that will leave you breathless. What we actually have here is a really cheap Hong Kong rip-off that happens to feature Joe Lewis. And as you would imagine, this one has not a lot in the way of extras or anything entertaining on there. Mr. X. Now the next Asian movie, this one is a Korean thriller from the Tartan Asia Extreme label. This one is called H. And as to what H actually means, I can't tell you because it's one of the major plot twists. It says on the front there, this is one to watch with the lights on. Well, it's not a horror film. It reminded me very much of those early 90s psychological thrillers that all came out in the wake of Silence of the Lambs. Not everybody's cup of tea, it's definitely pretty nasty in points. But if you like psychological thrillers and you've got a strong stomach, definitely worth a checking out. H. Next up we have Joint Security Area, or JSA. So this is probably one of the most famous Korean movies outside of Oldboy, and coincidentally happens to be from the same director as Oldboy, Park Chan-wook. Now let's be honest, if you're into Korean films, it was probably Oldboy that set you onto them. And from what I've seen, Park Chan-wook barely misses the mark. So this is his early breakthrough movie about the North and South divide in Korea. And it's one of the most respected and loved Korean movies of all time. Haven't got around to watching it yet, but I'm expecting good things. It was also nice to see this getting the 2-disc special edition, so there's loads of nice interviews and making-ofs, obviously all in Korean. But this is a very nice release from Tartan Asia Extreme again, so one I definitely didn't want to pass up. More Tartan Asia, because I seem to be finding these dead cheap all over the place at the minute. This one, Nowhere to Hide. I think this is a Hong Kong movie. Never heard of it, never heard of anybody in it. A surefire hit with fans of Hard Boiled. So this is going to be more heroic bloodshed. So yep, it was cheap, it's a Hong Kong movie, Nowhere to Hide. Next up, another Tartan Asia Extreme. I'd never heard of this whatsoever. It's called Whispering Corridors. I thought it was a J-horror, but it turns out it's actually a Korean spooky movie. I wouldn't say it's particularly horror from what I can tell. Turns out there's actually 5 films in this series, and they're all kind of related. This one is the first one, Whispering Corridors, but I also managed to pick up, purely by accident, the third part, which is called Wishing Stairs. So I haven't bothered watching these yet. I figured, seeing as there's 5 parts, I might as well just wait till I've got all 5 parts. So part 2 was called Memento Mori, and I'm pretty sure that's available on this Tartan Asia Extreme label. But then there was one called Voice, and another one called A Blood Pledge, which I haven't been able to find them yet. So, know nothing about them, not even going to bother watching them till I've got all of them. And then we have a Korean vampire movie. This one is again from director Park Chan-wook, famous for Oldboy. It'll be interesting to see what this one's about, because Asian vampire movies tend to go down the hopping vampire route, where you've got the Taoist monk and he writes on the scrolls and makes the vampires stop, and they can sense you by your breath. They're not like our kind of vampires at all. This one I think is more based on the Western idea of a vampire, so it'll be interesting to see what this is like. So I thought I'll give that one a go. Thirst. Back in more familiar territory now. Eastern Condors, starring Sammo Hung, Yun Bu, and Joyce Gidenzi, who I've never heard of. So, Eastern Condors, this is the old Hong Kong Legends DVD release. I've avoided this one for, 10 years, because I heard it was cut. Can't have that version, it's cut. So what I did was I went out and I bought the Hong Kong Blu-ray version, which is this. Now the film is cut on DVD because of animal cruelty, but when you see the scene that was cut, basically there's a snake dangling from a tree, and Yun Bu's character sees it while he's ranting about something, and just grabs it and rips its head off, but it looks like a plastic snake. So how he can possibly be offended by that, I have no idea. So if you're worried about the DVD release being cut, I wouldn't. You're not missing anything. Either way, I've got the nice Region A Blu-ray from Hong Kong, and now, to fill the gap in my Hong Kong Legends collection, I picked up the DVD version. And because it's cut, everyone avoids this one, so that was nice and cheap as well. I should point out, by the way, this film is bloody awesome. If you like good 80s action movies, this one is fantastic, and Sammo Hung is probably at his action best. Not his martial arts best, where he's doing his Bruce Lee impressions, but at his action movie best, where he's pretty much a Kung Fu Rambo. Absolutely fantastic in this movie. And Yun Bu, as always, is superb. Definitely worth checking out. Eastern Condors. Next up, Missionary Man. This is one of the cheap and nasty Fight Factory DVDs. They always feature loads of has-been action stars, and this one happens to feature Dolph Lundgren. So I've not seen this one, but I'm going to read you the back because the back sounds fantastic. Justice will be served, full of vengeance and out for justice. Dolph Lundgren directs, writes and stars in this action-packed modern-day western that will blow your mind away. When Ryder Lundgren, a mysterious stranger with a score to settle, rolls into a small town unannounced, life forever changes for its citizens caught under the oppressive thumb of a local tyrant. Armed with his Bible, his motorcycle, and his thirst for revenge, Ryder faces down the evil dictator in true vigilante style, proving that justice still packs a punch. How good does that sound? Could not resist that one. Dolph Lundgren, starring, writing and directing Missionary Man. Awesome. Next up, an Arnie movie. An Arnie movie that I haven't seen for years. I do remember this coming out. This was massive when it came out. James Cameron film. It was kind of the next big one after Terminator 2, which was the biggest movie ever at the time. And the reason I've never bought this is because it's been cut in the UK for years. I think it may have been uncut on VHS, but DVDs have all been cut, and I'm yet to see a decent Blu-ray release. But happily, you can get this from the States for about £1, including delivery, so I figured I might as well go for it and see the full uncut version of True Lies, because I haven't watched it in years. Now, this is an Arnie movie I just can't bring myself to watch. Pumping Iron. This is the 25th anniversary special edition of the movie that brought Arnie to fame. Pre-Conan era. This is Arnie talking about bodybuilding. Even back in the day I managed to see early Arnie stuff like Hercules in New York, the Jane Mansfield Story, Stay Hungry. But this one, his most famous one, I've never seen. But I figured it's about time I watched this very important chapter in one of the greatest action heroes of all time's career. So there you go, Pumping Iron. Next up we have utter disappointment. The films China O'Brien and China O'Brien 2. Now, these were dead easy to get hold of back in the VHS days. Those in the UK will remember Forefront Video. They used to be a budget label video company, and they'd have a big gold border around the boxes. And China O'Brien and China O'Brien 2 were everywhere they were sold. You could buy these in pound stretches. But since DVDs come along, these are buggers to get hold of. So I found this. Now, it's got an M for mature audience, so I figured this must be Australian. Pretty safe hands with Australian, it's region 4, but generally they're watchable, no problem. Turns out this isn't the Australian release, as far as I can tell. This is a repressing of the French release. So, where's the problems there then? Well, first off, the films are in 4:3, but they're in letterbox, so it's just one big stretched mess across the screen. And I can live with that. A worse problem. These have forced French subtitles on them. forced. There is no menus whatsoever apart from one that lets you pick which film you want to watch. You press your subtitle button on your remote, not available at this time, so you're stuck with French subtitles. So Hong Kong Boulevard, this is a really, really annoying release and I would avoid this. The French version looks exactly the same, but these bits are in French and this bit isn't there. But it even says like Anglais in Francais, and it's pretty obvious it's the French version, just with English text over it. Not sure if this is Australian or not either, because this is actually region 2, which is French, Europe, Britain. It's not the Australian region at all, so don't know what's going on there. But if you see this version, don't buy it, it's crap. Now what isn't crap is Lone Wolf McQuade. That's assuming that you can watch Chuck Norris movies. If you can't, just don't bother. But if you like Chuck Norris movies, this has got to be the best Chuck Norris movie I've ever seen in my life. Now my previous favourites were probably Code of Silence, The Delta Force, but this film is awesome. So imagine Walker Texas Ranger, but it's pre-Walker Texas Ranger. He's the super badass hard guy Texas Ranger, and it's so funny. He's up against David Carradine in this film as well, which is great because at least we've got a decent villain for him to play off. This film I wasn't expecting much from at all, and it was a hoot from start to finish. It was just bloody brilliant 80s crazy action movie, and I loved it. Lone Wolf McQuade. On the back of that we have some more Chuck Norris. This one is Invasion USA. So this is a canon movie directed by Joseph Zito, who was the director I know from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. This is identical to the earlier Invasion USA releases from the States. This film is good, I love the premise, but Chuck Norris is such a miserable bastard in this film, it's really hard to like him, even though he is incredibly badass. This is like one insane set piece to the next. Pretty enjoyable, but it's definitely not Chuck Norris's best. Speaking of best, the one I forgot earlier, I meant to say, my other favourite Chuck Norris movie is Silent Rage, where it's pretty much Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers. Love that movie. But Invasion USA, I'd say it's in the upper half of the Chuck Norris movies that I've seen. Also picked up Breaker Breaker. So, we've got two great combination of things here. We've got Chuck Norris in his first proper role. He was already in Slaughter in San Francisco, but that was a Hong Kong movie, so apparently we don't count that. This is his first American starring role, without his moustache or his beard, so clearly he's going to have a weakness there. But the other great thing this combines is the 1970s car chase movie. So this is Karate meets Smokey and the Bandit. Doesn't really have the humour, but it's got the car chases and the trucks and the CB talk. Not one of Chuck Norris's best, but it was one of his early ones, so we can kind of forgive him there. Breaker Breaker. And I have been really on a Chuck Norris kick because this one is Hellbound. Now, this is apparently one of his worst films. This is 90s Chuck Norris. You can tell by the extra long mullet. And this is some kind of crazy action horror movie, I think. I haven't plucked up the courage to watch this one yet, but on the back I did notice it's got some guys on horseback that look like knights or something, so God knows what they're doing taking on Chicago cops. Another interesting thing, this is actually a Canon Video DVD release, which is something I've never seen before. They're usually released by Warner's or MGM. Unfortunately it's in full screen, but it was super cheap, not expecting much. The last of this month's Chuck Norris movies, and there might be some more coming. So moving on to Blu-ray, we have Godzilla vs. Megalon. So this is one of the crazier mid-70s Godzilla films. This is the one that features Jet Jaguar, which is a clear Ultraman rip-off. This is one of those Godzilla movies that you either accept it's Monster Royal Rumble or you just try and avoid, because this was at the real tail end of the Showa era. Me personally, I think this one was great. I loved it when I saw it on TV years ago, and then I had it on video for a while. So this is the US Blu-ray release from Media Blaster's Tokyo Shock label. And as Blu-ray releases goes, these are clearly cash-ins. There's no art on the inside. There's no disc art, it's just a silver disc with the name printed on. Not a great deal to see on the back. I do like how it continues over with the little logos for each monster that's appearing. What you get is, they are in full widescreen, but you get the US version, so it's got all the US titles, but you do have the option for US or Japanese audio, which is something. It's a great time to be a Godzilla fan because all these films are just coming out like crazy, and it's getting hard to keep up, to be honest. But I'm doing my damnedest. So that is the first of two from the Tokyo Shock Media Blasters label. The next one is one of my all-time favourites, Destroy All Monsters. This one is an absolute classic. If you look on the front, just how many monsters are in this is ridiculous. It even is reflected in the back. Look at this. These are all the different monsters that feature in this film, and there's tons of them. Again, we have the Japanese version and the US version, but the picture on the screen, all the titles and everything, is the US version. No special features, you can forget that, you're not getting anything like that. But at least we've got the film looking reasonably good for its age, and it's just nice to see. Look at that cover, that's a great cover. I actually prefer these covers to the covers that all the other companies have done. Definitely like these ones. I wish they'd do some more. It seems like they've only got the two to release. There's a few Godzilla movies yet to go, so maybe we'll see some more from these guys. We'll see. But that's Destroy All Monsters. This is King Kong vs Godzilla. So this is actually the film number 3. The one that came after Godzilla Raids Again. I think that must make this the first colour Godzilla movie as well. It's pretty crap. It always was. And this Blu-ray release is a total rip-off of the old DVD. It's the same cover, the same extras, it's the same print that's just in English. There's no Japanese versions on here whatsoever. But I figured, seeing as some of these Blu-rays are starting to get a little hard to get hold of, I better just get on with it while it's cheap. I don't fancy paying over the odds for something like this. It would be really nice to see a proper version of this, where you get the Japanese cut. But until then, this is what we get. King Kong vs Godzilla. And of course, this film had a sequel that didn't feature Godzilla, but featured King Kong and Mecha Kong. So this is King Kong Escapes. And you can see there's King Kong, but on the right hand side, we've got Mecha Kong. He's absolutely brilliant. You've got Mecha Godzilla, but this is Mecha Kong. Utter lunacy, and it's a bit of a shame. Again, this Blu-ray has only got the US version, not the full uncut Japanese version with Japanese language and titles. I like this film more than I like King Kong vs Godzilla, purely because it's got Mecha Kong in it. They should have brought him back for something else. He's great. But there you go, King Kong Escapes. Next up, we have the new release of Godzilla 2000. Now, normally these Toho Godzilla collections are double features. This one kind of is, but you just get the US version and the Japanese version, which is so vastly different. There's a whole 8 minutes difference that they had to put them separately on these. So this is counting as a double feature. Again, very light on extras, but it's good to see that they're getting high definition releases. Not a big fan of Godzilla 2000. I like some of the other later movies, but this one, I think my problem is I don't like the first Godzilla very much because he's the bad guy. I don't like Godzilla 85 very much because it's just him, he's the bad guy. And this film kind of suffers a similar fate. In my mind, the best Godzilla movies are where they've got tons and tons of monsters and it's just Royal Rumbles from beginning to end, like Destroy All Monsters. Getting ever closer to completing the collection, Godzilla 2000. Next up, two actually very, very good modern Godzilla films. This is Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack, which is probably the best of the Millennium series, purely on the basis that it's got so many monsters in it. Not only does it have Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, it's also got Baragon, but that would have made a bit of a crap title. The only thing I don't like about this is Godzilla's the bad guy and King Ghidorah's like the hero, and he was always the evil, most evil of all monsters. He's like Godzilla's nemesis, so to turn him into a good guy just didn't really work. But special effects wise, Story-wise, it's pretty damn good. And then we have Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, and I like any film with Mechagodzilla in. But yeah, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. It's probably not the best Mechagodzilla appearance, but he's still pretty good. And of all these 2-packs, this one is really, really strong. You've got 2 very good, very modern Godzilla films. So definitely worth checking on that one. And finally, for the Toho Godzilla collection, these aren't Godzilla films, but they've got Godzilla on the top. The Rebirth of Mothra 1, 2 and 3. The Rebirth of Mothra trilogy. So these are the modern versions of the Mothra movies. I've got to be honest, Mothra is my absolute least favourite of all the kaijus in all of Toho. But here he is in 3 of his own movies. These are very modern, so the special effects are going to be pretty decent. And I believe this is the first time that Part 3 has ever been released in the Western world. So, be interesting to see what they're like. I'm not holding out much hope, but there you go. Mothra 1, 2 and 3. Next up, we have a very, very nice new Blu-ray of Stage Fright. Now this is 80s Italian slasher movies, directed by Michele Soave. This is the one with the big owl masked headed killer, and it's brilliant to see a Blu-ray this good from a brand new, seems to be, company. Exposure Cinema. I've had a look back in their catalogue, and there's about 5 or 6 releases, and most of them are 1940s thrillers. This is part of their 80s chiller range, and it is number 1. Unfortunately, they haven't announced what number 2 is going to be yet, but if it's anywhere near as good as this release, it's definitely going to be a top recommendation. These guys have been taking notes from Arrow. We're not quite at the level of free posters and postcards, but there's a nice booklet in it. It's got loads of extra features. It's got... oh, it's limited edition as well. Don't know how many copies there are. It looks great. Absolutely great. And you also get a DVD and Blu-ray version that I've just spotted there. The documentaries on it were really, really good. There's about half an hour of Alan Jones talking about the film and obviously plugging Argento as much as he possibly can. There's also a brilliant documentary on Joe D'Amato, and if you know who he is, you will really want to see this documentary. There's also a cut version comparison, VHS era featurette, collector's booklet, original trailer. This is really, really good release, and I would definitely recommend checking this one out. This is the owl-faced killer that I was talking about. Anyway, Stage Fright. Really top-notch release from Exposure Cinema. If you're on the fence about this one, I'd pick it up because I don't know how limited this is. It might be a couple of thousand. And if this label kicks off, like I think it's going to, then you may be kicking yourself in the future for not buying this. Speaking of great, great Blu-ray companies, Arrow's release of Deadly Blessing. So I actually had this on the really old Arrow release before they did Arrow Video. It was just a DVD though, with no extra features. And I've been putting off picking this one up because I thought, well, I've already got the film. But I'm so glad I did. And it's just reminded me how cool Wes Craven was back in the early 80s. So this is pre-Nightmare on Elm Street. This is after he'd made, well, Last House on the Left and everyone hated him. Then he made Hills Have Eyes and everyone liked that but still hated Wes Craven. And he really, really was struggling at this time. It wasn't until Elm Street in '84 that he became able to do whatever he wanted. This one stars Ernest Borgnine as an evil Amish father figure. You've got Michael Berryman, the guy from Hills Have Eyes, running around as his crazy deformed son. And you've got Sharon Stone as one of the heroines in this film. It's really good, and this is pre-Witness, don't forget. This is showing the Amish as a real terrifying community. And they're not called the Amish in the film, don't get me wrong. But they all have beards and tractors and live in the country. It's clear that they're meant to be the Amish. And they really, really hate modern society. So the last thing they want is these 4 hot chicks who insist on wearing underwear for most of the film to be hanging around near their impressionable sons. Definitely worth checking this one out. It's got a great commentary by Wes Craven. And he also explains that bizarre ending. So there you go, from Arrow, Deadly Blessing. Also from Arrow, but part of the Arrow Academy range. This is Ashes and Diamonds. So this is a Polish film from 1958, set in Poland, during the German occupation. This Arrow Academy range is very much the highbrow arty films, but they give them the same kind of attention that Arrow Video do to the trashy exploitation. So these DVDs and Blu-ray sets, they're usually dual format editions, they're worth checking out if you find them cheap. So far I've got quite a few, and every single one of them I've enjoyed. So I've yet to watch this one. I need to be in the right mood to watch arty Polish films from the 1950s, but I will get there one day, and I'll be glad I bought it when I did, I'm sure. So that is Ashes and Diamonds. Next up we have Steelbook time. So this one is, of course, Bruce Campbell versus the Army of Darkness. When did it become Bruce Campbell versus the Army of Darkness? It was Army of Darkness, and then it was Evil Dead 3 Army of Darkness. Now they seem to want to call it Bruce Campbell versus Army of Darkness. That makes no sense. He's Ash, not Bruce Campbell. Anyway, this is the new Steelbook release. It's actually identical to the regular Blu-ray release, except you get a nice shiny cover. So if you like Steelbooks, maybe you want to check this out. If you're not bothered, just get the normal release. It's exactly the same. It does feature the alternate ending and the audio commentary held over from the DVDs, but the DVD actually featured both cuts of the film separately, and the Blu-rays don't, so I reckon it's only a matter of time before we see an all singing, all dancing Blu-ray version. But for now, this will do nicely, because I already bought Evil Dead 1 on Steelbook ages ago. God, this came out about 2 years ago, something like that. And then I managed to buy Evil Dead 2 on Steelbook. So I was quite happy to just finish the trilogy, get it done once and for all. As far as the movies goes, might surprise you to find out, I can't stand Evil Dead 2. I think it's crap. Evil Dead 1 I like, but it reminds me a bit too much of Morph at the end. And Army of Darkness, I kind of like it, kind of think it's a bit crap. It's the one I saw first, actually, from back in the 90s. I didn't get anywhere near the Evil Dead till it came out on DVD, but Army of Darkness, I saw that on VHS. And the problem I have with 2 is it was so bigged up as like, oh, it's the ultimate version of Evil Dead. And it's not, it's just a retread with more comedy and slapstick in it. Honestly, I didn't like Evil Dead 2. I found it a chore to sit through. Didn't stop me buying the damn Steelbook though. Now, a Steelbook release I was over the moon to get is Ghostbusters 2. My God, how long has it taken to get this film out on Blu-ray at last? But boy, was it worth it. We've had Ghostbusters, the first one, on Blu-ray for 3, 4, 5 years, but they've never done anything with Ghostbusters 2. Even on DVD, it had no special features, it had no extras, nothing. But this is pretty damn good. It's a bit light on the extras. There's at least a nice interview with Ivan Reitman and Dan Aykroyd that is clearly post Harold Ramis dying, so it's good to see that they've actually bothered to record something new for this. There's deleted scenes, which we've never seen before. They weren't that great, but at least it's some deleted scenes. And there's the legendary music video for Bobby Brown's On Our Own. So I thoroughly enjoyed revisiting this. Ghostbusters 2, absolutely brilliant film. And for this evening's finale, normally I'd show you my latest box set, but I haven't bought any this month. But I did buy this. This is the German media book of Stone Cold, starring Brian Bosworth and Lance Henriksen. Finale, you say? Oh hell yes. This is one of the best 90s action movies starring someone you've never heard of. It kind of feels like Arnie should have been in this, but he couldn't be asked, or he was doing something else. This movie, from what I remember, was bloody awesome back then. It's really difficult to find a good version on DVD. But this German media book has just come out, and we get a double play Blu-ray, so you've got Blu-ray and DVD, and as an extra bonus, there's a third DVD of Stone Cold 2, which I've never seen. Now, German media books, I'm not too up on media books and hard boxes and all that. I've got a couple of them. Most notably, Mad Foxes, that was well worth picking up on media book. This one I saw on Shagrat's channel the other day, and he hadn't even finished the video and I was already tracking this one down. It cost a bloody fortune to get it here. I had to navigate through a completely German language website, but it came within about 4 days, and they even sent a packet of sweets in there. So I was thrilled to bits to get this. So media books, if you've not seen them, they're like digibooks but bigger. There's the original art, which I kind of wish was on the front because I always thought that was cooler. There's Brian Bosworth there. This film was so cool. That's him on his motorbike. Unfortunately, with it being German, it's German text. Directed by Craig R. Baxley, who had something to do with the A-Team. I think he was one of the directors. Michael Douglas presents, so he was a producer on this. Yeah, it's just a shame I can't read the damn thing, but there you go. Loads of nice pictures. I'm sure the facts and stuff is all very interesting. I might sit and try and work it out one day. There he is, Brian Bosworth on his motorbike, and in the back you get the DVD and Stone Cold 2. So, Stone Cold, I'm so chuffed to finally see this again. I haven't seen this since it came out on VHS, and I just remember it being one of the greatest action movies I've ever seen. And I was into stuff like Predator and Commando, and this was a rental that I'd not really heard of, but there was no else worth getting at the time. And I was absolutely blown out of my chair by how cool this film is. Very, very pleased to see this film on Blu-ray, even if it did cost an arm and a leg. So there you have it, guys. That is this month's Blu-ray and DVD update. Hope you've enjoyed seeing all of these. If you've got anything to say, please feel free to pop it in the comments. And I will see you guys in 1 month's time for another update. This has been Luke. Thank you for watching.